Spy thrillers like the James Bond movies certainly draw appeal from many general audiences. And perhaps appropriately, most tend to have at least a restricted rating, but not quite classified top secret. And I admit that when I put military intelligence with assignment to the DC area on my dream sheet as a young lieutenant, it was certainly a consideration in my mind for a dream job that historically even I could acknowledge no but-a-bar lieutenant could ever get. But if the Army is going to assign you whatever it wants to, it really doesn't hurt to ask. But for the more intellectual viewer, the political dramas, particularly those that were produced in the late 1950s and early 1960s, like Gore Vidal's Best Man, Otto Preminger's Advising Consent, James Harris's The Bedford Incident, and John Frankenheimer's The Manchurian Candidate, are the genre picks of choice. And within that unique genre, the title of the original book by Eugene Burdick and Harvey Wheeler that gave rise to the 1964 movie Failsafe, directed by Sidney Lumet, the director of Hollywood classics like 12 Angry Men, Dog Day Afternoon, and Network, was Abraham 58, though it was released as Abraham 59. And many credit the success of this Columbia Pictures release 10 months after Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove by RCA Studios, which had originally began producing that film, to the tensions between the communist Soviet Union and the United States, making them timely and in an age when, rather than panic by social distancing and facial coverings, the nation was panicked by fallout shelters, regular civil defense drills, testing the alert sirens, and the threat of nuclear conflagration. But one intriguing bit of little-known trivia is that the authors, Burdick and Wheeler, who later had to settle a plagiarism suit for similarities to another book titled Red Alert, is that both authors were actually born in 1918, the year of the Spanish flu pandemic. The gee-whiz special effects in the film may have been state-of-the-art for the age and time, but the mechanics behind this film, with a story centered on failures in redundant, complex computer systems, actually found the graphic computer images on the screens in the war rooms of NORAD actually manipulated by human hands that made them appear to be electronic. No less spectacular than the actual set for the soon-to-be-released set for Starship Enterprise, that sci-fi thriller going where no man had gone before in the short run for the cult classic Star Trek. The budget was so strained, in fact, that the production actually ran out of money, but it managed to gross $3.9 million at the box office. For those who recall the line of Henry Fonda playing the president to his old schoolmate General Blacky, portrayed by the white-haired Daniel O'Harley, about recalling his Old Testament. The book title, Abraham 59, may not appear to be entirely pulled from thin air, but the solution proposed by a character only known as the president, a character who actually has no name throughout the entire film, and just the title, the president, was intriguing, even disturbing for many people who saw the original release, when after testing negotiations between two untrusting superpowers, he proposes a human sacrifice in propitiation for mistakes that had been made, in compensation for the loss that would be incurred by an avowed enemy. And on that day, the president would not only lose his wife by choice and the island of Manhattan, but also one of his longtime friends, who he had sent to complete the sacrifice on behalf of the nation, who concludes the film with the ominous words, "I am the master." And this scene paints an indelible image of what comes to mind with the term weapons of mass destruction, which many associate first with the nuclear age, the race to build atomic bombs by both the Nazis and the Manhattan Project, and the bombings at Nagasaki and Hiroshima, which tend to overshadow the fire bombings in Dresden, the drones of bombers sent across the channel in the Battle of London. The first thoughts about chemical warfare are often associated with mustard gas during the trench warfare in the first war to end all wars, even if many tend to associate mustard gas with mass fatalities when it is actually only a debilitating blister agent. And probably most would be surprised, actually, to discover that as for biological warfare, its first use, some erroneously say, was recorded by the Mongol hordes back in 1347 when they used catapults to hurl plague-infested bodies into the Black Sea near the port of Kappa in the present-day Ukraine and the Genoese Trade Center on the Crimean Peninsula. But at least according to the Guinness Book of World Records, we can thank the Assyrians back in the 6th century BC in present-day Iraq who used ergot, a plant-based poison to induce delusion and paranoia with its hallucinogenic qualities. Sophocles and Herodotus record uses of poisoned arrows that had used both venom and bacteria like gangrene and tetanus, which may sound familiar to some soldiers who rotated in military training to the Jungle Operations Training Center down in Panama to learn about the venoms of poisonous frogs, a practice similar to the Ponzi sticks employed by the Viet Cong forces in the jungles of Southeast Asia, long after the 4th century BC. So, biological warfare actually did not begin with anthrax, the most commonly recognized biological weapon of terror most probably know today, which inspires more fear than it probably deserves, because to deliver an infectious dose, you actually need to deliver between 8,000 and 50,000 bacilli to set off an infection that will not produce any effects at all in symptoms for several days. And some who may be ascribed to the conspiracy theory variety even suggest that the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 may have been the result of early experiments with biological warfare, or an experiment gone out of control for combat in World War I, where certainly chemical agents like mustard gas were already being deployed by the German forces in total warfare, a theme that is granted some credibility by the reluctance of any of the warring nations to publish accounts of its devastating effects, and a story that was only reported by the press of the neutral country of Spain, giving rise to the actual name, the Spanish flu pandemic. And anyone familiar with the vexed methods that defendants will employ to avoid culpability even in a courtroom, even before lawyering up or invoking the Fifth Amendment, knows very well that an admission of culpability, especially for serious wrong, and even offer of sacrifice in recompense, as the president offered in the movie Failsafe, would truly be a rarity, especially during a time of war or intense hostility. Even before Adolf Eichmann got to the defense claim that he was only following orders, he had already exhausted choice of law, familiar to many law students, and even a claim of defective extradition, as if special operation forces that had snatched him up might actually apologize and return him to genteel comforts in a South American villa to live in peace for the rest of his life. It is clear that the Spanish flu certainly touched ground in America, setting off a large outbreak on Fort Riley, Kansas, the former headquarters for the cavalry forces and home for Army veterinary medicine. And even the U.S. Army today admits that Fort Riley is believed to be the origin of the worldwide epidemic that killed millions. Probably the greatest pandemic the world had ever seen, greater than the bubonic plague in the 14th century, killing between 2 and 4% of the world's entire population, according to Robert Smith, the director of the Museum Division on Fort Riley. And they acknowledge that the pathogen was the H1N1 avian flu, as most agree, and at least the current account reports that the patient zero was an Army cook named Albert Gitchell, who was the first recorded infection of what would become hundreds on Cap. First in a total of 107 in the first days, to be exact, as recounted by Lieutenant Elizabeth Harding, the first head nurse from the Nurse Corps, established in 1901 by a Fort Riley alumni, Surgeon General George Miller Sternberg. This briefing has been unclassified. That concludes this brief. My name is Major Mike Webb, and by God, I am running for governor of Virginia. I ask every Christian, every conservative, every Republican, every Virginian, and every American true to, like the motto of the infantry, follow me, and we shall overcome. Honest. And y'all come back now. Here. This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.